This last. Oh, nope, I'm gonna change it.
Yeah, that's the last minute, don't mess with it.
Do you want to send an update? No. All right, looks like the number of folks joining the meeting has slowed down a little bit, so we can get started. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. For those in the room, I apologize. I'm going to be facing the screen. So my name is Padraic Monks. I'm with the Water Infrastructure Finance Program. We are part of the Water Investment Division, and this is the public meeting for the federal fiscal year 2022 draft clean water and drinking water intended use plans and project priority lists. Next one. I'm going to go over our agenda today, give a few program updates, and then we'll move on to our clean water and drinking water IUPs. We're also going to cover a couple of our ARPA funding programs, the Village Wastewater and Water Initiative, and our Combined Sewer Overflow, CSO. We'll get into the clean water and drinking water IUP and PPLs. Slide. Basic logistics. We've got folks attending remotely and in person. Both participants, if you would please mute yourself, unless of course we call on you to ask a question. In terms of taking questions, we'll take one at the end of each section. That is after the end of introduction and clean water, drinking water, and ARPA sections. And we will take questions in the following order. I think we've got at least one person joining us by phone. We'll take them first if they have questions, then in person in this room, followed by raised hands in Teams. Got any questions on how to do that? Feel free to just jump in, but also if you go up to the reactions, the top bar of your screen, you can choose the raised hand icon. And then also we will be monitoring the Teams chat. This meeting, as you'll see at the top of the screen, is being recorded and we will make it available to folks after the meeting. Next slide. Our timeline for the intended use plans, we are running a little bit behind schedule with all the additional grants this year. We have a deadline for receiving public comment of September 6th. You can do that by email. Tom and Amy's emails will be shown at the end of the meeting. You can also take comments today, either verbally or in the chat. Our goal is to have the final intended use plans by September 20th and funds availability notifications out September 21st. Please note that the current intended use plans do stay in effect until the new IUPs are adopted. So briefly, program updates. The biggest development this year is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. With Bill, we have 5 new EPA SRF grants for a total of 7. So that is, in years past, we would have 1 grant for our funding for clean water and 1 for drinking water. This year we have 4 on the drinking water side and 3 on the clean water side. They do provide for 5 years of increased funding, starting with this fiscal year through federal fiscal 26. Occasionally we get comments from folks that seem to sort of merge ARPA and BIL, and they are definitely distinct. Some projects will receive funding under both ARPA and BIL, but the ARPA funds do not affect the SRF program directly. There's also a big difference in the time frame. ARPA funds need to be obligated quickly, that is by the end of 2024, and expended by the end of 26. Again, with the BIL funding, which affects clean water and drinking water differently, they've got 5 years of funding. In terms of that increased funding, in a nutshell, for comparison purposes, dollar figures are all in millions. Last year, on the clean water side, we had 7.8 million. On drinking water, we had 11. This year, for clean water, we have 14.9 million, and drinking water, 61 million. Of that 61 million, I know that 28 million is associated with lead service lines, which you'll hear about more later. Bipartisan infrastructure law is often, the funding levels are often referred to as transformative, and these are to result in transformative investments. And that, from a dollar perspective, is true. But really, if you are to go, read the law itself or EPA's implementation memo, the focus on the transformative nature is really on ensuring that disadvantaged communities are able to, benefit from this funding. So our office generally needs to engage in a process of better identifying disadvantaged communities, increasing outreach to them, removing barriers to participation. So that's going to be a significant part of our effort over the next 5 years. And when I refer to disadvantaged communities, I'm using that term the way that that VIL uses it, and it encompasses clean water as well. And the clean water side, we refer to them as projects meeting our affordability criteria. Under VIL, the majority of subsidy is directed to disadvantaged communities. Additionally, this year we have congressionally designated spending, also called CDS or earmarks. CDS refers to funding that goes to specific projects, and that level of funding is basically decided by Congress based on input from our congressional representatives. We don't have a direct say in that at all. It's important to note that CDS funding does come out of our base grants. So this year, although our total level of funding is higher, our base grants for the clean water and drinking water are less than prior years, and that does affect the amount of subsidy we have, especially non-disadvantaged subsidy. Additional updates, another big one is the Build America Buy American Act, or BABA. It, in a nutshell, expands domestic sourcing requirements. These are my words. Please go to the EPA guidance or the law itself to get more specifics, but all iron, steel, plastic, glass, lumber, etc., must be manufactured in the U.S. And this applies to all projects funded off the coming intended use plans. I think technically it's any project that receives funding from a federal award made after May something of this year needs to comply with BABA. EPA is currently developing implementation guidance and waivers for some projects and project categories. The public comment period on those waivers just ended, I think, last week. The time frame for issuing them, I'm not sure, but hopefully soon. The two proposed waivers there's the de minimis materials. I understand that it would be for, if you're a project that is subject to BABA, but you have an incidental purchase, for example, off the shelf box of screws, that wouldn't necessarily need to comply with BABA. And then there's also a proposed small projects waiver. EPA took comment on whether $250,000 would be the appropriate threshold for that. So smaller projects, say under $250,000, may be able to avail themselves of a BABA waiver. And this is not in place of, but in addition to American iron and steel requirements. We include notice of our ARPA programs in the intended use plan, although they are strictly speaking not part of the SRF program. Our awards our awards on the priority list do take into account ARPA awards. So we're determining SRF loan and PC grant awards. A reminder, this was true last year, but bond votes are not required for loan principal amounts that will be forgiven. So for example, if you've got $1 million loan and $500,000 in subsidy, you would need to bond for the $500,000. This slide is a heads up that you will be hearing from us in the coming months regarding an update of our municipal and private loan state environmental review procedure, so known as the SRP. We will be combining clean water and drinking water aspects of that into one new procedure. There'll be some updated forms, better documentation, and streamlining of the process. We'll also be incorporating environmental justice considerations. There will be a 30-day public comment period about that on the proposed SRP. So again, we'll be in touch with you with more information on that in the coming months. I think that's it for our intro. Got any questions before we jump into the clean water?
How do you, I'm sorry, I came in late. How do you get to this, to get to your presentation slide on the computer?
That there was a email that was sent out to our, what we call our constant contact list, or you can go to our website if you just search by Vermont.
I got your initial thing from announcing the hearing, and I don't,
if you go, there should be a link to our website in that one perhaps. And then
there's a link for the intended use plan.
okay.
There's a Teams link on the intended use plan page.
Okay. Thank you very much. Excuse me for interrupting.
no, thank you. Okay. Does our phone caller have any questions? Please unmute yourself and speak up if you do. Okay. Anyone in the room?
There's a hand up.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yes, Wayne?
You guys going to talk anything more about the DAMA requirements today, or was that it just for the intro?
That's just it for the intro. We're really waiting to hear from EPA.
What's the timeline on that? If you had something that's going up a bit later this year, as far as rolling that into the front end documents and being able to understand what those requirements are going to be.
We are still waiting for language from EPA on what those contract requirements need to be. We will let you know as soon as we know, but we don't know yet. We do have training on BABA in September, so hopefully we'll know more then.
Do we know if that May date, is that firm date? Because I think there was some interest in extending it. I don't know if EPA ever agreed to do that.
One of the draft waivers considers more of a rollout period than the statutory required date, but I don't know that we've seen that waiver finalized.
Last we saw it was draft and we commented on it. Yes, please do. We don't know if they will extend it.
All right, thanks. Megan, where?
Hello, can everybody hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Morning.
I guess just a couple quick questions, just trying to understand all the funding streams. The 3 clean water grants, what are the names of those grants? You said there were 5 new SRF grants.
Oh,
You
we're gonna
referred
get to
to
that.
three.
We will get to it, but there, what we refer to as base is referred to as general in that intended use plan and in the grants themselves. So we got the general supplemental, and emerging
Okay.
contaminants.
Okay,
And like Tom said, we'll get into it, but the general and the general supplemental are essentially treated as one.
okay. And then do you know the amounts of the CDS that came off the top of the base grant?
I don't off the top of my head.
Close to 4 million.
Was it?
Mhm.
I don't know if you could hear Tom, close to 4 million.
That's for clean water.
Okay,
For clean water. Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head for drinking water. I can look that up. And there's
Okay.
2 rounds of it. There's the ones who got CDS funding last fall, and as far as I know, they don't actually have their money yet. And then there's also a round that's proposed right now. So they may not line up in time with what with our funding cycle.
okay. And then my last question for this section was, you mentioned that the increased BIL funding was bumping us up to 14.9 million. Is there any projection, like, is that sort of expected to be the same for the next 5 years? Is it a ramping up? Does it just depend on our needs? I don't know if you could speak at all to what the overall 5-year package may look like.
Yeah, I can perhaps do a little digging off the top of my head. I think we're seeing a fairly modest increase on the clean water side in the general, or in the general supplemental, on the order maybe 16%. I think we will see a doubling next year on the emerging contaminants in clean water. Clean water right now, emerging contaminants is only 450,000. I think on the drinking water base, general and general supplemental, I think maybe it's a similar modest increase. I think emerging contaminants is fairly flat.
A modest
Lead
increase over.
goes up. lead is flat as well.
Patrick, would you like me to throw out the numbers?
Eric actually has some facts, so yes.
Well,
So this makes,
or if you want to
this
send
is
them out,
based
then
Sorry,
on,
one second. Yes, Megan?
we don't have to like detail them verbally. Like if they're available somewhere, it would just be helpful for us to kind of know, to be able to communicate with our administrations, with legislators, because I think there's this continued perception, and I can try to provide comment on this, that the EJA funding is going to save us in clean water. And from the writing that I'm seeing on the wall, it is not going to save us in any way, shape, or form. And I think people need to be made aware of that.
So there's guidance on the bill website. There's some summary memos that came out that we can email you, Megan, that might help.
And we can also include it in the response summary.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right, so maybe we should just, for the sake of time, maybe keep moving instead of getting into the specifics right now.
Yep.
I don't see any other hands.
There's a question in chat.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, I meant to say in the beginning of the meeting, as we deal with this hybrid situation, we might be a little slow, so please be patient. So, Christina Haskins, is there any information yet on how BABA may not apply to continuing projects that are already in construction? I think I would perhaps repeat what Lynette said, that we're really waiting to hear from EPA. Anything else you want to add to that, Lynette?
So if they're already in construction and they started before that initial start date of May of this year, then they should be fine. Otherwise, they need to look at that waiver.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Tom, onto the clean water. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Tom Brown. I'm the Clean Water SRF program lead. And I'm going to talk about what we've got in store for the next year here. With our draft priority list, we're seeing some real expanded numbers. I think everybody's in the same boat, getting a lot of stuff completed. So as Padraic had mentioned, we have 3 grants on the Clean Water SRF side. You'll see them here as the general supplemental, and then the emerging contaminants. We're looking at a total amount of funds for the year around $90 million that we're going to have available for projects. The general grant, with all the repayment funds and interest and carry forward from the previous year, we're looking at an $81 million. The general supplemental is the 9.6 million, and emerging contaminants is really kind of at this point a low amount because it's intended for planning funds. So we are getting one of the points I would make is usually the CWSRF general grant. We're usually around $8 million, and you can see it's 5.6 million this year, and that is reflective of the CDS that was provided, that came right off the top of the grant. And looking at our priority list, we are showing $172 million in need, according to the applications that have been provided. We have our $90 million that is available right out of the general and supplemental, and then the $469,000 in the emerging contaminants. The fundable projects, where it says 1, that's kind of just a placeholder because it's so new. We do have several projects that we're expecting to access planning funds for emerging contaminants. For this year, there has been no legal change to our ranking procedure for our priority list. I do want to point out that there has been some changes in interpretation that might affect your PC grant calculation and your ranking. Be assured that it is standard and applied to all applications. The same people are reviewing them each year and building an objective process. So our priority ranking, of course, is where you end up on our list, but it also is used for grant calculations for the pollution control grant as well. For readiness to proceed, this slide is actually going to cover drinking water as well. If you're on our priority list, when it's adopted, you will get, if you're fundable, you will get a contact from us letting you know that your project is fundable and that you can proceed. As we're working through the project, some may not be realistically able to get to construction this year. And this criteria is applied so that we can bypass a project that's not going to be able to make it, so that we can free the funds up to move down our priority list. We do have a fundable line this year, as we did last year, for the first time actually. And these criteria are, you know, we want to see that you are applying for your final design loan, your step 2 loan, by November 1st of this year. And then we want to see that you're submitting your environmental information document and your 90% design drawings by December 1st of 22. The next is looking at your bond vote timing. You would need to have your bond vote warned by January 31st of 23. And then we would want to see all the proper documentation of the bond vote for May 1st, 23. And lastly, you need to apply for a loan by June 30th of 23 for this year's funds. So this next few slides are going to be talking about additional subsidy in the form of loan forgiveness. We are showing each by grant in this slide here. So we have a regular percentage that we have to provide as part of the grant agreement when we are determining how much subsidy is available. For the general this year, we'll have 2.27 million. And this is based on 10% of that amount is going to be no restriction for us internally on how we provide that. 30% of this grant amount is going to be directly related to the affordability criteria that we will discuss in a little bit here. The general supplemental is a $4.2 million grant. We're required to provide 49% of that grant in subsidy, and it has to go to communities that meet our affordability criteria. And then the emerging contaminants is 100% subsidy that we're going to be giving away. We have another slide on affordability criteria, so I won't get into that right yet. So our first batch of subsidy that we're planning for is the planning subsidy. We have 3 types of planning subsidy this year. One is, the first is off of the base grant. And it is our typical that we've had for several years now that's been very popular and has been instrumental in getting projects moving forward toward construction. We'll be providing 50% of the loan value up to $100,000 for step 1 and step 2. $100,000 per project. There is a cap for this subsidy of $250,000 per borrower. Category number 2 is the planning subsidy for the supplemental. 100% of the planning costs will be forgiven up to $125,000 per project for these specific initiatives. The combined sewer overflow which includes everything from long-term control plans, H&H modeling, rain gauges, any kind of flow monitoring that's needed, whether it's equipment or if it is contract. Also, 3-acre stormwater retrofit program. We have a grant program for 3-acre stormwater that we're trying to use for construction. We're trying to use our 3-acre subsidy for getting those projects ready for construction. So this is also not additive if there is other components of the project that's qualified for a different subsidy as well. And then we also have our village wastewater planning and design funds. This subsidy is, as I mentioned before, $100,000 up to 100% planning up to $125,000 per project. And then the third category is the emerging contaminants subsidy. And this is a 100% planning subsidy up to $150,000 per project. We are continuing with the Lake Champlain Tmdl affordability subsidy. This was started last year and is popular and is going to be staying with our IUP this year. In order to qualify for this subsidy, it would be a municipality that has a NIPD's effluent limit under the 2016 total maximum daily load regulations. So if you are a facility that has that and you end up with a post-project user rate exceeding 4% of the median household income for your community, this is probably a program that will work for you. Things to note, you do need to apply for construction in this IUP year by June 30th, 2023. There's a 100% forgiveness up to $500,000 for up to 4 sequential funding years, up to a maximum of $2 million per project. And on top of that, we will be reducing the 2% administrative fee that we normally charge for our municipal loans, municipal construction loans. It will be a 0% administrative fee for this subsidy. We are continuing with the floodplain restoration subsidy as well this year. It's identical to last year. There were 2 types of categories in this, whether it's a FEMA Federal Emergency Management eligible project or not. If it is eligible for FEMA, there's $100,000, 100% forgiveness up to 50% of the total project cost, or $250,000, whichever is lower. For a non-mobile home community, it's 100% forgiveness up to 25% of total project cost, or $100,000, whichever is lower. If it's a FEMA ineligible project, and it's a mobile home cooperative, 100% of the forgiveness up to $250,000. And also, if it is a non-mobile home community, it's 100% forgiveness up to $100,000 as well. Backed by popular demand, construction subsidy. We introduced this a couple of years ago. We weren't able to last year, but we're bringing it back by popular demand. If you want to access our construction subsidy, the community must be municipal and it must meet our affordability criteria. The subsidy is limited to $500,000 per project, or 40% of the loan value. And we do have a bucket of $3.5 million for construction subsidy this year. as well. In order to qualify for additional subsidy, first of all, you have to be a municipality. Additional subsidy, a lot of people get confused about when they are actually guaranteed their subsidy. When you apply for a loan and we have what we need to start working on the loan, we will reserve capacity for additional subsidy. Once we have the funding application and you've completed the qualifications-based selection process and a draft engineering services agreement is submitted, if you are looking at a final design loan or a construction loan, you would also have to meet the criteria. If it's construction, you would have to have your final design completed. If it was going to design, you would have to have your facility plan completed at that point. Additional subsidy is not guaranteed until the loan is approved. We use the term obligated at that point in which it's guaranteed. You will know when that happens because you will get an authorized letter of funding from our program alerting you that the loan has been approved and has been forwarded for underwriting at the bond bank. And that's when you can count on absolutely having your subsidy wrapped up. Do we have any questions on those slides for CWSRF so far?
Starting with our phone callers.
Starting with our phone callers.
Hearing none. The room.
Wait, Tom, just a slight correction on the Lake Champlain Tmdl. The date in the draft IUP is June 30th, 2022.
Oh,
I submitted a comment on it. If that be extended.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne.
Hope it's 23, Tom. That's
I missed it, right?
Okay.
Peter Regolan from Grand Isle Consolidated, I'm sorry, from Grand Isle Fire District number 4. And I'm just a baby in all this. Is there someone from Vermont Rural Water here today?
There's somebody attending.
Okay, good. Okay. I just, because it's a small system, it's.
Oh, yeah.
I know I don't have to tell you, but, okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, just a very quick, are you going to talk about the emerging contaminants for the clean water side a little bit more, Tom? I'd like a little more detail about how that would apply and what type, more on the clean water side, I guess, if you could just expand on that a little bit, maybe about what those opportunities are and what they would apply for. Is that a treatment plant that would be removing PFAS, for example?
Sure. I mean, for projects that we're seeing now, we do have a lot of people that are, we're kind of thinking it's going to go to testing. So helping get those where there's known contamination, get those projects rolling. There isn't enough subsidy to really get anything built. So we're going to use it for the preliminary engineering final design.
You know, we do have, you know, again, 5 years of funding. If that emerging contaminants grant will go up, it's still not going to be a lot on the clean water side. And we have more flexibility in terms of defining emerging contaminants on the clean water side than we do the drinking water. So we certainly welcome, you know, any inputs. I think will need to be a sort of ongoing conversation about how we use that grant in the coming years.
EPA does have an FAQ that we can add to the response summary on typical clean water project eligibilities for that. And I've already sent a question asking about another type of project that we're seeing more of in Vermont. So not included currently.
I think that would be helpful, I think, for us, Wayne would be, and everybody is just ideas, particularly for looking at sort of the statewide needs, you know, for instance, this biosolids or sludge.
We're going to move to hands. I don't know who had them up first. I'll just go in order. Megan.
I put a question in the chat too, and I might have missed it. How much money is available for the PC grant? And I don't think I saw that in the IUP, right? The pollution control grant?
That's interesting.
Well, for FY '23, it's 3.3 million.
Yep.
Did you hear that, Megan?
Yeah, 3.3 million.
Okay.
So that's an additional to the base, the general subsidy and the supplemental subsidy, because PC grant is not really a subsidy, it's a grant.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Any?
Well, I guess one other thing is that is the number that is most able to be influenced by the state legislature, correct? If we demonstrate that there is more need, that is the number that comes from the state versus the other money that you talked about is coming from the EPA.
Yes.
There's a state appropriation, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Jenny Osler?
I had two questions. So on the planning subsidy, the maximum forgiveness of 250K per hour, I can't even say that, is that a lifetime or is that per project? Is that per fiscal year?
Per year.
Per year.
It is per year, yes.
Okay, and my second question is on the construction subsidy, the 3.5 and change million. I believe that was written in as first come, first serve. Is there any consideration that the agency look to include that distribution in the IUP process versus first comes, first serve, especially with the affordability criteria in some of the smaller communities that may not be as fast moving as some with more support, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. We can continue to give that consideration. I think one way we are balancing the need to or the ease of using first come first serve is also by increasing the amount of subsidy available for disadvantaged communities, that perhaps helps benefit some of the smaller communities that aren't as able to move as quickly. But do understand that's it's a challenge, and I think whether we're able to do it this year or whether we should modify our process for next year, it's open to comment and open for consideration.
Thanks.
We'll give there will be a formal response in the responsiveness summary for the IUP. Jenny, I believe you submitted that in email as well.
Yep. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Michael Maynard.
Yeah, I've got two questions. One with the readiness to proceed. The environmental report, is that being evaluated when we submit the environmental report, or are we meeting the readiness to proceed criteria when the categorical exclusion gets issued?
It's for submittal.
Okay, great. And then the second question I had is it looks like, I think the BIL requirements are that something like 50% of the funds be used to provide subsidy to disadvantaged communities. Is it the state's intent to provide all of that funding to disadvantaged communities, or are we going to see some other subsidy available to non-disadvantaged communities in the future?
Well, the subsidy categories, whether it's required to go to disadvantaged communities or not, that's set by the terms of the grant from EPA and in the case of bill funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we do need to comply with that.
That was something, I think their requirement was something like 50%, not 100% though.
Right. So
49%.
Yeah, but it looks like if you're not a disadvantaged community at this point, you're not getting any subsidy at all.
Well,
from that particular grant.
Okay.
but there is subsidy.
We have 10%, we have 10% of the base clean water grant is available subsidy for anyone.
Okay.
But again, it's our base grants that get hit by CDS, which reduces the amount of subsidy we have for non-disadvantaged communities.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
But again, please do submit any, additional comments you have, and we'll, as Tom said, be addressing them in the response summary.
Is that all of our questions? Okay, moving on. The next few slides are going to be regarding natural infrastructure funding. There has not been a lot of change in this from the past years, but from a high level, the eligible projects for natural infrastructure funding are listed here. It's not comprehensive. There will be other opportunities. If you think that your project is a natural resource project, give us a call and we can discuss it. One common thread is that it must provide a water quality benefit, and it must meet the definition of a non-point source pollution project, which is section 319. And as we mentioned, give us a call if you want to talk about your project, and we will work with you to figure out how best to fund it. So natural infrastructure funding, there's three sub-programs that we're running. One is the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program. The second is the Interim Financing Program. And then you could also access a regular loan as well, and whatever subsidies might be available depending on the type of borrower and the ranking of the project. Natural infrastructure projects do not require some of the cross-cutters that are applied to normal loans. So this note here of using Tier 2 funds, these are repayment funds that came back into the SRF program over the years, and they are not considered federal funds at that point. They are state funds. So therefore, the federal cross-cutters wouldn't apply if we use those funds. The first that I'll talk about is the interim financing. We did a $5 million put aside again this year as well. If you're a municipality and you're looking for this funding, you can get a 0% loan. If you're a private entity, it's a 0.6% administrative fee loan. It's a 5-year loan. And then we have flexibility in how we build your repayment schedule. Very commonly, you're waiting for grant monies to come in that you plan to pay off the loan with. So there would be a balloon payment in the last year to provide as much time as possible to get the grants to come in. It is also first come, first served as well. We did reserve $2 million of that for the Vermont Land Trust for the Farmland Futures program that is continuing. And then we have the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program. This program is, I think what I would like to bring out first is we are working on this program intermittently, operating on a limited basis. We will respond to requests, but we are in the process of increasing staff to take on this workload. The sponsorship program is where you would have a host project that would take on a natural resources project that would be sponsored by the host project. What happens in this is we structure the loan for the municipality so that additional principal is available to pay off the project, the sponsored project, and then we would also make up for that additional principal by reducing the administrative fee appropriately so that the net payment or the gross payment for the loan is the same for the host. There is an opportunity if you are a private borrower and your project is not meeting the timeline of the host project, we can be creative and getting a bridge loan through Vermont Economic Development Authority and helping with that. Then when both projects are done, the loans would be combined into the sponsoring loan. We are in the process of also looking at some other alternatives to making this program a little more transparent by using host projects that have completed construction. We will be addressing that further as that program develops more. And without further ado, I'll introduce Lynette Cladone. She's going to talk about this slide.
Hi, I'm Lynette Cladone, and I need your help to complete the 2022 Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. So that's all of you, the consulting engineers, the towns, and the department, to be able to find any completed engineering reports that are signed and stamped, reporting on any needs that are needed by the Clean Water Act for any eligible project. So that could be anything wastewater treatment plant related, stormwater related, capital improvement plans, anything under the sun. I have 6 months left to complete the survey. I started 6 months ago. And we're a little behind. They're accepting the data through February 28, 2023. So to the extent that you can submit a final PER instead of a 90% PER for that February 28 deadline, that would be greatly appreciated because we can also get that in on the survey. It is the same date that the survey closes and the PER closes, so please coordinate with me if you are able to do that so I can make sure to get everything in that day. And why are we doing this? We are doing this because it affects our funding formula for future grants from Congress. And so we want to have the best showing possible in the survey. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. The next slide, we'll introduce William Wilson. He's going to talk about ARPA CSO grants.
Yeah, good morning. William Wilson with DCE section. We're just going to go over the ARPA Combined Sewer Overflow Grant and then another somewhat related program called the Overflow and Stormwater Grant Program, or the OSG program. So there was a $20 million appropriation for state fiscal year 2023 to go towards CSO projects. These can be used for municipalities that are working on eliminating or abating their CSOs. So the way we calculated the grants this year was based on the state PPL application for all CSO projects. The estimated costs for those projects were totaled. And then also we accounted for other known funding sources. And then each municipality's percentage of that total was applied towards the $20 million appropriation. We also included an adjustment factor based on each municipality's median household income versus statewide average. That's sort of how we came to the numbers that are in the IUP. Big grant this year can be used towards any CSO project that's on the PPL. So to some degree be determined by the municipalities themselves, as long as those projects are on the PPL, and will be able to be spent and completed by the 12/31/2026 deadline. And then additionally, there's the OSG program, which is a much smaller grant through the EPA. those dollars come with additional requirements, including all the federal crosscutters, as well as needing to be applied to proportionally specific projects in disadvantaged communities, green project reserve projects. But again, that money can go towards combined sewer overflow correction projects, as well as stormwater and subsurface drainage projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. Next, Emily Hackett. We'll talk about our Arpo Village wastewater slide here.
Morning, everyone. So I am new to the engineering section, and I am the ARPA Village Water and Wastewater individual. So the current IUP will be replaced by the previous IUP. So we got $36 million total for ARPA funding, and $8 million for 2022 and $28 million for 2023. All the money, as you've heard several times, has to be spent by December 31st of 2026. ARPA is really here to fill the funding gap on the new village water and wastewater projects. There are some requirements. One is that it needs to be SRF eligible. There needs to be a designated center, and there is a local share, about 10%. And sewer extensions are not eligible for this funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And now we have questions on the ARPA slides.
I've probably got a question on the ARPA slide. So I know you guys have all heard this, but you know, when the amended clean water IUP went out back in May of 22, I'm speaking specifically to the Killington water project. That was on there at 135 priority points. And there was a commitment shown for state fiscal year and ARPA funds of 2.3 million. There was a total forecast of 23.5 million shown for that project. Of course, then when this draft came out, quite a significant change in there. And I guess to back up a little bit, you know, part of the main objective and goal of this project is to address the water quality concerns of several of these existing public water systems along Killington Road. Now Killington went from 3rd or 4th on that list down to roughly 53.8% and only showing 2.3 million in ARPA grant funds, and there's 0 shown moving forward for state fiscal year 23. So I guess initially my first comment, I guess, would just for the record, I guess reconsideration of how the priority points were calculated and ranked, because the state fiscal year 23 ARPA funds for the village water were basically shifted from Killington to other projects for this current fiscal year moving forward. So I guess due reconsideration, I know that's the water project is kind of different, challenging from a ranking standpoint compared to the village wastewater projects, but I guess reconsideration of that ranking and, you know, numbers were arrived at, please.
Thank you, Wayne. Any other questions?
Actually, if I could just add a couple to the mark. So, so the thing I do want to stress about Killington is they're ready to go. You know, tentatively looking at a bond vote in December this year. The design updates are being prepared, in addition to permitting. So they're slated to go to construction next year. So that's a project that's ready to go to construction now in state fiscal year 23. So that in itself, you know, hopefully would kind of push them up on a priority compared to some of the other projects that are currently on that list.
Thank you, Wayne. We'll address that in our responsiveness as well formally.
Hey. So I'm Amy Galford. I'm the Drinking Water SRF Program Lead, and I started in December. So I'm going to cover specifically the drinking water portion of this. The overall picture, as Padraic mentioned, we have more money. We have more loan forgiveness, which is one form of subsidy that we have, and I'll kind of use those terms interchangeably. But things are also more complicated. We have 4 grants, which is how we get the money from EPA when we're talking about a grant on the drinking water side. And we have to follow specific details within each of those. So that's part of why the IUP is so long for drinking water. It has a lot of detail, and the IUP serves kind of 2 purposes. It's a public communication document to all of you, but it's also part of our grant application to EPA. So part of the way it's written is part of our, to be able to get the money from EPA. So I'll talk a little bit about the overall picture, and then I'll go into the state program set-asides, just a really general summary of those. Not everything we do is loans. There are these state program set-asides that are really important for helping water systems in the state stay in compliance, and a lot of proactive programs there. We do have a couple of loan programs within the set-asides that I'll highlight. And then we'll talk about our main loan programs. I'll go through the 2 new ones first, the emerging contaminants and the lead and other service line money, and then the general funding, which is most similar to the way the drinking water SRF loans have worked in the past. It is a combination of base and supplemental funding in the background. And this is the money that, as Tom mentioned, with clean water, the revolving part of our program is that the money gets repaid, except for the parts that are forgiven. It comes back in and is able to fund more loans. And then this is just a reminder to me to mention that we have a number of guidance documents and other information on our website that we need to update, and we're working on that. The intended use plans are current. It's just that some of our guidance documents have not been updated to reflect the last couple of years of intended use plans. So the intended use plan is the current legal how we're managing things, but we are working on a couple of those updates. Next slide. Okay, so the overall funding picture, it's the intended use plan, and what's different with drinking water this year. There are 3 priority lists at the end of the document. Here I've lumped together, I'm not going to go through the entire table in detail, but I've kind of summarized a lot of the tables that are within the intended use plan. So there's the new emerging contaminants money, from which we're pulling a small set aside, and mostly loans. There's the new lead money, and I'll go through that in detail. And then there's the general funding. So for all of those, there's some new federal money. For the general, there's a state match, and then there's repayment money that comes in. In the long term, years from now, this will all end up back in general funding is what we expect. And then there's some of this money that's coming in as repayments and interest and carried forward from prior years. So in all, we have a little over $98 million to spend. A little under 16 million of that will go to the set-aside programs I'll talk about on the next slide. And then about 82.5 million for loans. An individual loan that we give out may combine some of these funds. If you end up getting a loan that is a combination of, say, general and lead funding or general and emerging contaminants funding, we'll communicate to you what you need to track in terms of eligibility and invoicing to have that properly paid. I've lumped the general here in terms of the base and supplemental because from the borrower perspective, you won't even know which of those your money is coming from. The dollars are the same. The subsidy is the same if you're getting it. So I've lumped them here. We just have to represent that to EPA and track it internally. But when you get a general grant, it's just general dollars. And then across these programs, we have over $32 million in loan forgiveness. And that was just a reminder for me to define MHI there being the median household income. And on the drinking water side, I'm looking at which census areas, whether it's a town, a village, or census designated place, best lines up with the user population of the drinking water system. A couple reminders about eligibility because these haven't changed, but we get a lot of questions about them. The borrower on the DWSRF side is a regulated public water system. So you already have a WSID number. That's who can borrow, not a neighborhood within a larger system, generally not a group who's not a water system yet. There are some other state programs that are new on the ARPA side for some other types of water money. And so this can go to both community water systems, whether they're municipal or private, and fire districts are included in the municipal group, or they can go to nonprofit NTNCs or TNCs. So these are the ones that are not residential, But as long as they're nonprofit, we can loan to them. Sort of the classic example of that would be a school, or some cases there might be a town building where people work there during the day, or it's used as a public meeting, but it's not a community water system. But if it's nonprofit, it's eligible. And so the federal and state eligibility guidance documents still apply. I think EPA may update their federal document to reflect some of the details with the lead and emerging contaminants, but the basic eligibility, that's what we're following, is primarily that federal guidance document. I've got that linked from the website, and I can get that link to anyone who needs it. And then we have a state guidance document that's smaller that just has a couple of clarifying points on that. But it's primarily the federal eligibility drives what we do. And so on the drinking water SRF side, it's really functioning for public health protection, and it's for upgrades of existing infrastructure. So public health protection, particularly on these community water systems, and then taking care of the water systems that we already have. It's very limited where we can provide funding for brand new water systems or for expansion. If the expansion is only for growth, for economic development, it may be a great idea, but that doesn't mean we can fund it. Those are only if there's a serious public health risk. If you're looking at a project and trying to figure out, does this count as expansion? Could I start a new water system here? I recommend that very early in the process, you consult with me and with Megan Young, who's the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division's capacity supervisor. And she and I work together very closely. And she's also here with us in the room today. Just so that we look at it both in terms of the SRF eligibility, and then particularly you need to be in touch with her about some of the regulatory requirements of that, because starting a new water system is not a small thing. And this also applies to consolidation of water systems, which can be eligible, but we need to look at the details. Next slide. Okay, so the set-asides. I'm not going to read all the examples here, and I didn't pull everything out of the IUP. There's more detail in IUP section 6. It's laid out in a lot of detail, particularly because of the we have to explain how each piece is funded from each of the 4 underlying sources. So there's a lot of, it may look duplicative, but that's the reason for that. So what does this fund? The state staff who run this program and who also do a lot of the regulatory work in the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. And staff are supported in our AID, who does a lot of the administrative support to get you reimbursed. We also have technical assistance contracts. And then we also work with the Bond Bank for municipal loans and VITA for private loans. And so that helps support those transactions. So it covers a whole variety of things that you have to do on the regulatory side, and also proactive work for things like assessing your distribution system and detecting leaks. Service line inventories, I'll talk more about in a moment, coming out of the lead money. Some emerging contaminant studies are in the set-asides for the emerging contaminant funding. I've just lumped them all together there, and there are many more in the set-asides. 2 I'm going to highlight are the asset management plan loans. So these are loans within the set-asides. We have been doing these for several years, but we're looking to do more of them. 10 to 15 loans is our goal, of up to $50,000 each with 100% forgiven. These are eligible for municipal systems, and you can ask Megan for more information about those and her staff, or you can watch for updates on the capacity website. And then for the source protection loans, this is an existing program, but we're putting some additional funding into it this year. Again, this is for municipal loans. It's set to a 20-year term. And this is to purchase land or an easement, for example, around a wellhead area to protect that. So again, there's a lot more detail in section 6 of the IUP, or you can contact Megan Young for more information about that. And she is in the room with us today. Next slide. Okay, for the emerging contaminants, so if you, the focus here is going to be PFAS for this IUP year. Literally, the language in the federal guidance says to focus on PFAS. So for those of you out in the remote world who don't have this in your system, you can take a stretch break and rejoin us in a few minutes. What are we talking about here in terms of emerging contaminants? Primarily, it's going to be either installing treatment, such as activated carbon, to remove the PFAS from your source, or it will be development of a new well source that does not have PFAS to replace your contaminated source. I've had some questions about what levels of emerging contaminants of the PFAS this involves. It's not just for an MCL exceedance, just like the base funding can be for, the points may not be as high depending on the level of contaminant you have, but this is not just for those that exceed an MCL. We have a state MCL in Vermont. There may be federal standards in the future. This is called an emerging contaminant, but in the case of PFAS, the program will continue even if a federal standard comes out in the next few years. And I'll just mention that projects would be eligible for general DWSRF funding because we fund treatment and source development projects all the time. But it makes sense to fund them under this category when they're for this purpose. So this is the first of 5 years of this. A small set aside on this one, so most of it is going towards loans. These loans are 100% forgiven. That's the federal requirement on these. About $6 million in construction loans. We have put aside a placeholder of about $500,000 to pay for planning loans, the preliminary engineering, design, and source development work. And then we have some internal state fund transfers, which I don't have time to go into detail for. These aren't really loans. They're just taking into account the fact that we were using DWSRF money and other funding sources to work on PFAS ahead of the federal requirements. Next slide. Okay, so lead, I'll have several slides on this one. This is the other new chunk of money. When I talk about a service line, I'm talking about from the street main to the building. There are two purposes for this lead money. One of them is for lead service line removal, and the other is for service line inventories. These projects, again, would be eligible for a general DWSRF loan because we can fund that type of work anyway. It is not for premise plumbing, except in very limited cases. There may be some cases, say, in an NTNC system. You can check with me on those. But generally, we're not talking about premise plumbing inside of a building. So not talking about brass and solder inside of a building. We're just talking about service lines here. If you're looking at a project that involves corrosion control treatment, where you add chemicals to either increase the pH or to add a corrosion inhibitor, or if you're doing a project that involves addition or upgrades of meters, those need to be funded under the general DWSRF loans instead. And again, we can combine multiple funding sources into one loan, but in terms of the eligibility for this, it's focused on the service lines. And I want to say with the corrosion control, there's a lot of focus on the lead service lines, but that doesn't mean getting rid of corrosion control or that corrosion control won't be needed in some cases. If you are going out and putting a lot of shiny new copper pipe in your system, you don't want to run corrosive water through that for either the health or maintaining those assets. And corrosion control works on things that are going on inside of the building that are not eligible for this, and that you're just not going to be able to get behind the walls and into every bit of solder and brass. And that actually is where a lot of the lead and copper issues come from in our Vermont systems. So this is again the first of 5 years of this funding category, about $28 million for the loans and set-asides combined. This one we are using a substantial amount for the set-asides, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then a little under $21 million for loans. This one has a picky thing in the federal requirements that we have to give exactly 49% of this funding as disadvantage subsidy, and that's across our entire portfolio of projects, not per project, in order to receive all the funds from EPA. So we have to track this ratio of what's subsidized versus repaid loans. And for that reason, we may have to give subsidy out in increments. We'll see how this develops. So what's on the priority list shown for subsidy is how we hope things will play out if everything goes according to plan. But we may have some details about the subsidy that we need to play out over time. Next slide. Okay, so first component of this is lead service line replacement. So these are the construction loans, a little over $6 million. Now, at the time we sent the priority list out for both programs, including drinking water, we didn't have the guidance on our new money yet. So that went out in January to be due in February, and then around that same time we started getting guidance on this new money. So we didn't ask, do you want this specific type of money? The same thing is also true for the emerging contaminants money. So on the construction loans, those are ones that we pulled from the priority list applications that look like they would be eligible for this source of funding. I want to talk a little bit about definitions because they can get surprisingly complicated with lead service lines. What's eligible for DWSRF funding is broader than the definition of a lead service line in the lead and copper rule or the revised lead and copper rule. We can fund replacement of a full lead service line, a partial lead service line, which is often what happened when the municipal side of a service line up to the curb stop was replaced, but the private side was left as is. Lead goosenecks or pigtails, which are the connection from the main to the service line, or galvanized pipe that is galvanized steel that is downstream of lead or has an unknown history, which certainly a lot of it would have an unknown history. We cannot fund partial lead service line replacement. And you can't just upgrade the municipal side. If you're going to do these projects and have them SRF funded, they need to be, if it's already a partial, you can get rid of the remaining piece, but you cannot take a full lead service line and replace only part of it. And of course, that makes sense. The whole point of this is to get the lead out, and you want to do the entire project all at once efficiently. There's differences state by state, but in Vermont, we have said that private portions of service lines may be included in the loan. So that's kind of like curb stop to or shutoff valve to the house. That can be included in the loan. It's up to the borrower whether you do that, but certainly you should be incentivizing that type of upgrade, and you want to get the entire neighborhood done. While you're working in that neighborhood, you want to get everything taken care of all at once. So we'd like to see you incentivize those and include those in your loan. The loan terms, in terms of the years, the annual admin fee are based on the local median household income and water user rates in that area. The disadvantage subsidy for this type of funding is based on whether the local income is below the state median household income. The disadvantage subsidy can go up to 50% of the loan, and it's not limited by the user rates. So that's a little difference in how we're applying the disadvantage subsidy under this grant because of the requirements that we have for how much subsidy we have to give out in this category. It so happened that the 3 construction projects we had to rank on this priority list were all under the state median household income. Oops, you got to advance that, Tom. Okay, so for the service line inventories, those are, I don't have lead in the header there because you need to inventory everything in your water system, not just what's lead. You won't know what's lead until you go out there and inventory everything. So sometimes it gets called a lead service line inventory, but really we're inventorying everything so that we can figure out where the lead is and prioritize things for removal. This is required, so a compliance requirement under the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division manages under the revised lead and copper rule for each community or NTNC water system. So that's the schools and office buildings by October 2024. So that comes out to about 670 systems in the state. So 2 functions there, identifying the highest risk sample sites. The sample sites should be prioritized based on lead exposure. And then we're also identifying lead to remove. And hopefully we can have the SRF funding help take care of removing that. Inventories may have been done back in the 1990s when the first original lead and copper rule came out, and maybe records have been maintained. Maybe they've kind of drifted over time since then. So this is a chance to reset and make sure that that we know what's out there and that we've got the right sample sites identified. The Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division will provide training on the content and format that's required for an inventory. I think their guidance from EPA for that came out the day after our IUP was released. So that's kind of hot off the press for them as well. We do have staff here from that division to answer questions, but you can think about this as a planning loan exercise. This is focusing on the record review and visual inspection first. So just figuring out the universe of what's out there and then proceeding from there. The smallest 600 systems out of that cluster are eligible for technical assistance under the set aside. So this is why there's a large set aside on the lead service line funding. Some of that work will be done by Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division staff. There may also be approved contractors, and this will be at no cost to those smallest systems. It's coming out of the set aside. So this is not a loan, it's just technical assistance. Then for the 70 largest systems in the state, which are tiny by national standards, but are big ones in Vermont. So those with over 1,000 users and more than 250 connections, they are eligible for loans to hire consultants. And so we added you to the priority list without you applying. We just identified those systems based on our database. We have a little under $15 million available for these loans, and the math on the priority list just comes from dividing up by the number of connections. Out of that, we have a little under 10.9 million to be forgiven. And again, this is kind of restricted by this exact formula we have to meet in terms of giving away 49% of the money and 51% of it being in loans that have to be repaid. The cutoff for that, where we sort of run out of disadvantaged subsidy there, is around the local median household income being about 120% of the state MHI. So those should be fully forgiven, and then some systems right on the edge may get partial forgiveness, and those over that income will not get forgiveness on the inventory loans if they choose to seek those. Next slide. Okay, so planning loans, I kind of referred to this earlier, and Tom talked about it too, but just reiterating, for planning, we're talking about new source development or step 1 preliminary engineering project or step 2 design. There must be an eligible project goal that this is coming out. A lot of these are going to eventually lead to a construction project, so that needs to be an eligible project. We had a question recently from one system about something where the water system might turn it over to someone else, and that wouldn't be eligible. We wouldn't want to put money into planning for something that's not going to eventually be an eligible DWSRF construction project. Sometimes things do stop at a planning stage, things like the asset management plan loans and some other types of planning loans that are just sort of stay at step 1. These loans we generally take on a rolling basis, but we can use a priority list ranking if necessary. We have a put aside, so $3.5 million that we reserved for these types of loans out of the total loan fund. Some of those are where people did submit priority list applications, even though technically they didn't need to because they're only seeking planning funds. Some of these are construction projects, but based on our criteria, they don't look like they're ready for construction in this funding cycle. So we expect them to be coming in, for example, for final design money instead. And we may have other potential applicants because those will come in during the year for planning loans, because you don't have to have filled that out back in February. So that was it was helpful actually to get some of those planning loan priority lists so we could figure out what might be an appropriate amount for that put aside. For this, we have a $250,000 cap per project. These are 5-year loans, no interest, no admin fee. This is the only time I've brought up additional subsidy here. So when I was talking about emerging contaminants, those are fully subsidized. For the lead subsidy, it's all forms of disadvantage subsidy. This is the only additional subsidy that we have available this funding cycle. It is only $981,000, and that's because of the base funding being reduced this year. So we've decided to put this here so that at least we can provide some planning loan subsidy, and it works out to about 28% per loan, given that $3.5 million set. So that's the subsidy that is loan forgiveness, doesn't have to be repaid. And then the balance can be rolled into subsequent construction loans, the step 3 loans that I'll talk about on the next slide. So construction loans, again, this is just kind of reiterating the timeline, and then I want to talk about a few details. To be ranked on the list, you have to have submitted the priority list. Everything with drinking water we talk about in terms of federal fiscal year 22, we're actually only have a month left in federal fiscal year 22, but that's when the federal government gave us the money and then spending it out in the future. So we went through and assessed those for eligibility and readiness to proceed criteria. I work on that with the staff over in drinking water. And then they're ranked based on continuing projects, what types of deficiencies are being remediated, or what types of upgrades to existing infrastructure. And I have the capital D there for deficiency to remind me to say, this is not just like thinking, I feel like my infrastructure is deficient. We're talking about actual deficiencies that were identified in a sanitary survey, or chemical or microbial MCL exceedances, that sort of thing. So those are documented deficiencies that we check for, and it affects the points within that category. There's also additional points you can have, including an asset management plan. So remember, that's a loan program we have from the set-asides, and we reward people for having gone through the asset management planning process. And so you've shown that you are thinking carefully about which projects you're going to prioritize. And same thing for having a construction permit already. That's a sign that you're ready to proceed. You've figured out how this project is going to comply with the water supply rule when you do it. And so we do give some points as a reward for that. There are also affordability points based on income and some for system size, more points for the smaller systems. Those aren't described on the priority list application. They're kind of built into our system. And I'm hoping that for next year, it's a little clearer how those are calculated, and I'll describe that on the priority list application for next year, which we actually have to start working on soon. And then again, meeting these proceeding criteria, or you would be bypassed and could reapply in February, which given our time lag is actually coming up pretty closely to be on the priority list for the next cycle. That's all I had on that. Okay, so again, base and supplemental behind that general dollars, they're the same to the borrower. We have to track that. You won't know which bag we're grabbing the dollars out of. I don't have to worry about that. We have somebody needs to mute in the room. We have 55 million. We have 55 million available for construction loans. There's a funding line drawn on the priority list, and that may move down during the year as projects use other funding sources. There are some that we expect to get those congressional earmarks, or to get, they may get more money from USDA, or there may be other grant sources. But for now, those aren't guaranteed. So they're still seeking DWSRF ranking. That funding line may move down during the year. And I try to be fairly conservative about what I could promise on there, but I expect that line will move down over time. Some projects may not proceed and end up being bypassed the next cycle, which will free up money for other projects. On the other hand, we may have projects where the initial estimate you had to make back in January or February versus what you get for bids and budgets right now may change. The construction loan forgiveness on this is all disadvantaged subsidy, a little over $11 million of that. And again, it's based on local income and the user rate, and it's up to 50% per project for those that are eligible. I have to, it's federally required for the drinking water side to show preliminary loan terms. Those are subject to change. We can do a longer loan term if the project is eligible under the criteria we have to follow. So we can go up to 40 years on some drinking water loans. We can lower the admin fee. So interest rates are 0, but the admin fee is defaulted 2% for municipal and 2.75% for private. That can be reduced if eligible. And then the third thing, we go through those 2 steps first, and then if there's still eligibility for disadvantaged subsidy, and if we still have it available, then we can give that disadvantaged subsidy. And I also, on the priority list for the general projects, have a preliminary disadvantaged subsidy funding line. It doesn't go quite as far as the loan amount funding line does, though it does get pretty close. And again, that line is our best estimate as of the date that I had on the priority list. By the time we adopt the final IUP, I may have a different estimate, hopefully moving down the page, but we'll keep updating that. I think that's it for my section. Oh, one last thing, just a summary, kind of like what Tom had. Just stepping back to the big picture here, the lead and emerging contaminants gets a lot of attention because it's the new money, but still the core of our program is the general funding. So we can't fund everything that we have need for. If we could, we'd go to the 83 projects shown on the right. We think we'll be able to fund 49 construction projects out of the general funding this year, which is still great, for a total of 103 projects plus some additional planning loans. So we have that would be if all of the inventory loan applications came in. We don't know exactly how many planning loans would come in, but this is a large number of projects. But there's still more money than we can meet this year. So we do have that fundable line. Hopefully over the next 5 years, we will work through some of the backlogs of infrastructure need and be able to fund a lot more of the distribution projects that aren't ranked in the fundable range right now. I think that is really it for me. There we go.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
I think we had a before, actually. We did. But any questions in the room?
Amy, thanks.
Really question.
That's right. Question, emerging contaminants, a clarification. So if you've got a community with a bulk water system that's compliant applying with the MCO for PFAS. And they want to start the exploration for a new water source. Because they're below the EPA health advisory, is that considered an eligible cost for the plan?
Yeah, I think, so let me ask again. So what do they have for data already on their PFAS levels?
They don't all sample data already. So they're above the EPA guidance or health.
I think having some presence. I think if you have some presence of having the PFAS, like you have a reason to be concerned. I think if you had completely non-detect, we would fund that under the general grant.
And then the next question on the lead service line. So if you've got a project that's under construction this year that's using another funding source, is there any possibility, like retroactively or something, they would be eligible for some of the subsidy under the lead service line replacements?
I don't want to give a definitive answer on that. The retroactive stuff gets a little tricky. They would have to have, to get the subsidy, it has to be part of a DWSRF loan. So it would have to be going through the whole process of getting a DWSRF loan. You can't get the subsidy without the loan because it's all tied together. So I think the question would be, would a particular case be eligible for a DWSRF loan under the lead?
So, but you have projects that are ongoing that may use or something, is that on, so they wouldn't have any mechanism or have the ability, I guess.
Okay.
Yes, technically, I guess one way to work around that, I guess, is they could borrow up to the $75,000 and maybe, so, I mean, maybe just a general question, I guess, for clarification purpose to see if any of these projects could be eligible for that piece of the funding.
Yeah, I think we will still be getting some more guidance from EPA about the details of how these roll out and eligible expenses. I haven't seen a lot of detail on that because since we don't know what lead is out there and real projects are going to be combinations of different types of work, how we track the expenses, and there may be surprises where we find lead where we didn't expect it, that sort of thing. So I think there's some details for us to provide some clarity on that.
This communities are. I guess my third comment, just in general, I think you guys probably see any comments on this, but I understand all the restrictions. I mean, there's some very targeted funding. There's a lot of money there, but you know, we've got a lot of communities that have been proactive on water system upgrades. And we can't forget about the aged infrastructure stuff. You know, they don't qualify for the subsidy affordability criteria for various reasons, but there's still a lot of needs out there in the next few years. And, you know, their water rates may be high for whatever reason, but we just need to be mindful of moving forward because there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and people have been perception there's a lot of funding out there, which there is, but it's very, very targeted. So we just need to be mindful, you know, of trying to maybe open that up or let's think outside of the box a little bit with some flexibility moving forward. And that's not just a drinking water comment, that's a clean water comment also. Yeah, there's 100-year-old sewer lines, 100-year-old water lines, you know, wastewater pump stations. So we just really, we can't forget the aged infrastructure stuff, I guess, moving forward. And, you know, hopefully more than less communities can qualify for some subsidy as we go forward for various reasons, either high water rates or there's some other kind of criteria. So that's just a general comment. I think we've all got some work to do on that for the next few years.
Yeah, and with the high user rates, that can trigger eligibility for the longer terms and the lower percentage. So that can help that you get a 40-year 0%, but it's not the same as the subsidy that people want to see, and that affects the bond votes. You know, I think what might be helpful, Wayne, is if you capture that in terms of if there's comments for this particular IUP, and then if there's also comments about future IUPs and things you'd like to see, because literally with the way the timing is planning out, we will be working on the next IUP before very long. So.
Oh, yeah, I have a couple. I'll try to make them very brief. So we get our water for our little system out of Lake Champlain. Are you, all of you, are you aware of any consortium efforts to protect or protection or increasing the goodness of Lake Champlain, I mean, like grant funding stuff that's where people cooperate because there's so many water systems that get their water from Lake Champlain?
Yeah, I don't know of one other than all the state and federal clean water requirements that affect Lake Champlain. I don't know of one for the drinking water system as a source protection for that per se. So I think it would fall into the clean water work, all the programs they talked about, either state ARPA money or the clean water SRF programs that are kind of feeding into that. Tom could probably speak more to that.
Okay. Also, so we're applying for a small grant. We applied in time for our town to get ARPA money that they've already received. And they have this perception that, oh, there's all this other money you could get. And so they don't want to give it to us. And so just as a broad brushstroke, am I correct in saying, so my understanding is that the ARPA funding went to towns and I guess to some entities within the state. I was trying to draw the distinction for them that the majority of the other money that came after ARPA in the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, most of the state revolving fund, and the way that a small system like us would access that is by applying through you guys for that money to the state revolving fund. Is that generally correct?
That's how I
Yes,
describe
okay,
it.
thank you. Okay, because I'm trying to just get that set. Okay,
Yeah, I think there's also infrastructure money that might go through like VTrans, so other state agencies, but in terms of the clean water and drinking water, the mechanism for that infrastructure money is what Padraic talked about at the beginning, going through the SRFs.
And is there any way that, and I don't mean to be rude or I'm trying to be, I really appreciate all that you guys are doing, and it kind of boggles my mind to come in and get a feel for it as a little dinky, outfit. Is there, we have had this big backlog and we've been in touch, and is there any way that any of this money can be used to give you guys additional staff to bump this up? Or
Yes.
how do we, and seriously, how, I'll just leave that at that. If somebody wants to get through Amy, get back with me, we're working with our engineers at Tmdl up in Burlington, and they're very concerned about the backlog of stuff and not just and about public safety, the aspect of it. And so I don't want to like throw any of you guys under the bus. I know you're working very hard and then you're just getting your directives about how the money could be spent as everybody's asking for it. So, and then one
So
other
Padraic,
thing.
do you want to respond to that in terms of staff?
It's well put, we agree, and, we are in the process of, using a percentage of the new funds to secure additional staff.
It makes sense. I mean,
We can't get them soon enough.
Yeah.
And, everything is slow these days,
Yeah.
wherever you go.
Right.
So our HR process is slower than normal because they're dealing with staff shortages and so forth. But, we do have sort of preliminary approval to bring a couple folks into our program and some into the engineering section. And drinking water as well. So it'll take a while to staff up because if everything goes well, the department will be adding a considerable number of positions, more than I've certainly ever seen get hired at once, certainly in my career.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
they can't get here soon enough though.
Okay, and then the small user, it's so mind-boggling. So we have consulted with Vermont Rural Water, and we have consulted with our regional planning commission to help us figure out how to get here's what we want to do. What are grants available? Are there consultants who do this stuff, that in-between thing for people?
To help guide you through the process.
Well, to help you figure out what you should apply for.
I'm gonna ask that question once or twice.
Folks here who might give you a card.
I will. It's like,
I think Vermont Rural Water does help with that. RCAP is another group that helps with that.
okay, we've been with them. Yeah, good. So
Yeah.
we're moving in the right direction.
I don't know if Vermont League of Cities and Towns is helping fire districts. They are certainly working with municipalities.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's
Well,
kind of a mismatch there. But, you know,
We're in
Vermont
that-
League of Cities and Towns has been trying to help with the ARPA side of things.
Fire
You were
districts,
you were addressing earlier about the ARPA money confusion. There is ARPA money that went to specific towns, and then they have their local public process for how to manage that.
Oh,
And then there are,
Well, I know.
and then there's the state part of that. So we didn't talk about all the different types of that. There are a couple that are related to drinking water infrastructure. So if you go to the state and our website, ARPA is one of the main links on there, I think. There's 6 different programs within that, some of which we talked about today because they're really closely linked to the SRF programs and projects that are getting multiple funding. There's also money on there for things like private wells and for mobile homes, communities that may or may not be, say, a drinking water system. So it does get confusing about the different pots, and we have a lot of questions about that. It's kind of hard because none of us is like, has the capacity to kind of help people walk through that puzzle. We're trying to figure that out with our partners at other agencies in terms of how to steer people, but just keep asking questions.
Thank you.
And I'll put a plug in for the capacity program and the public drinking water program. We work with water systems to help improve their technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And with some of this extra money, we are trying to get some additional staff to be much more hands-on with our water systems to help them understand how to apply for SRF loans, understand what funding is out there, understand how to develop an asset management plan. And
I was just going to ask if that's connected to the asset management.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Very
me.
good. Oh, you were.
I'm Megan Young. Yep, that's me. So-
This is great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
From feel free to reach out and
Okay.
we'll do our best.
So I have 3 quick questions for you, Amy. You said it was just under $1 million in additional subsidy, roughly 28% of the home for the planning loan. Is that first come, first serve? I didn't see that on the slide. I didn't see it.
Pretty much, yeah. In the trying to cut down number of slides to make sure we could fit it on time. It's similar to what Tom talked about on the clean water side.
Yeah.
In terms of subsidy is not official until you have that final official email from me.
But if you're applying for final design, you basically wait for that official email, which would give you the loan terms and then
Yeah.
that sub requirement before you actually signed everything, basically.
Yeah, so I can give you, when you apply for the loan, when things are working the way they should, loan application comes in and pretty quickly you should get a reply from us with preliminary loan terms, including the subsidy. You can kind of pencil that in at the 28% rate, and that's also assuming, that we get, 3.5 million pretty exactly. If we get 5 million in applications on those, we'll have to see whether we can fund those versus what we've got on construction loans. We have 3.5 set aside for that. If for some reason we didn't get the full 3.5 million, we'll probably go to construction money instead. But yeah, the initial guess would be 28% for those.
You mentioned in one of the slides that there's going to be training on lead service inventories, and a lot of that funding set aside is there for record review and identification. Are you going to be issuing guidance documents on what the expectations are? Is this a combination of testing? You said visual inspection.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, there's the question of what is eligible for SRF money, and that's my world now. I used to work in lead and copper compliance, as you know. But that's why we have Ben here and Megan to talk about what we do want to make things make sense. So they're somewhat separate in terms of roles and responsibility, but we want what we're funding on the SRF side to be things that will be useful for you in terms of meeting the compliance requirements. So we will be working together on that. If you guys want to say more on that.
Yeah, so we will have trainings through rural water, I think starting the first week in October for operators and or consultants, anyone interested. We are wrapping up creating the state-specific template and associated guidance that goes with that. Hoping to have that out in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll have fact sheets and guidance and things on our website. Long story short, we're not expecting digging. For now, we're not expecting water quality samples. We're really just trying to do the visual and record inspection, which is not insignificant to identify what's out there. And then hopefully in the next year, we get that. And then there's 4 more years of this funding to replace, remove, or really dig into unknown lines. So that's when we're gonna talk about doing some potholing, talk about doing some sequential sampling, and have to have system-specific targeted approaches, because all that gets really specific. So for this perspective, we're not getting into the really nitty-gritty details of like, where is the lead, what's the baseline? It's just, what do you see, what do your records have, inventory that, see if you have a lot of unknown, and then dig into it from there.
Thank you very much. And then just to kind of echo what Wayne said, you know, I think we're seeing a pretty unique time with construction costs and, you know, inflation related to supply shortages and other things. Federal crosscutters put significant at times on projects as well, and to not apply additional subsidy to places, even if they're not necessarily income eligible, is going to have an impact on whether or not those projects move forward. I think to Wayne's point, they're likely to not do anything, and those 100-year-old lines and stuff are just going to kind of stay there until things can be available for them to kind of help move forward. So it's just something to consider for future IUPs and other things. I know that you're stuck with certain stuff, but you're going to see it on what's on that list. You know, there are going to be projects that are within the funding range that need to adjust loan amounts. You know, and when you're applying it as a percentage for disadvantaged subsidy, it's going to affect the projects that are on the borderline. You know, and many of those communities, because you are funding, you know, strictly for disadvantaged construction piece, they're going to be waiting to know where they're at funding wise before they can move forward, because they can't afford a project that doesn't qualify for subsidy. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of message of we have more money, but costs have also gone up, so that's eating up a lot of the more money.
exactly.
But the more you can capture that in a summary comment, I mean, to the extent we can talk to people about what our needs are, that's helpful to have
Certainly.
feedback from your community.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Michael?
Yeah, I just want to kind of recap that as well, that there are a lot of projects out there that without some kind of subsidy may just not go anywhere and turn into a bigger headache. And I think some of these BIL memos related to some of that additional subsidy, that they do give you a fair amount of flexibility to come up with some alternative ways of measuring the, you know, how disadvantaged a system is. And yeah, I think we, you know, just to help our clients make use of some of that subsidy, we can, you know, help provide you some of the data you need to get some of that rolling and or work with the client. So it's we need to make sure that there's wider availability of some of this infrastructure funding here.
Again, please send in comments on that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions in the room?
Chat. After just,
sorry.
we have just a general comment, back to the construction costs. I don't think you want to get bombarded with updated costs on all these projects over the next week or so. So just maybe think a little bit about giving people some direction. I mean, we all know where things have been over the last 6 months, and with the inflationary numbers, some pretty significant impacts on some of these projects. So I don't think you really want, for consultants or communities, say, okay, my project is now X, probably for comments with this IUP, probably just wanted to draw the line in most cases, and we'll deal with that another day, I guess, probably.
That's been one of the things that was hard to get my head around starting this job. Is there's the priority list estimates, which are often very early in the process, and then there's what we can put on the IUP, and then there's, by the time the loan application comes in, and then there's you actually get the bids, and then there's what actually happens when you're in the field, which could need an amendment, or maybe you have good news and things go under, and then the final loan value is at the end of the project. So, so it is a moving target, and that's why I said, you know, particularly on the general list, I try to be pretty careful about not over-promising on that. So I'm hoping to give good news to more people than not. But yeah, it's a tricky thing to track.
That's appreciated.
I'd rather give people good surprises than break promises. So trying to be careful on that.
Right, just a reminder, public comments are due September 6th, and we will try to get the final intended use plan out as quickly as possible. Any other last minute comments, questions?
We have our contact information up, so feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Is it okay if we reach out to you right now?
Absolutely not.
Any reason not to end the meeting?
I think we're done.
No last minute chats. We have